Welcome back to our channel and to our continuing study of the book of Ruth. Before I dive into this video, let me apologize for a moment. I had recorded the last three lessons on the book of Ruth, and when I went to schedule them to be posted, I had lost the last three videos on the book of Ruth, and frankly, it just took me a little while to get back to re-recording them, so a little bigger gap than I had planned. Thought I was prepared, but sometimes in technology world, those things happen, so I apologize. I know most people aren't just salivating for the next video or something, but if you do, look for them every couple of weeks as they've been coming out. That's why. It's just a technological mistake. I'm still not exactly sure what happened, but those types of things do happen. So we're going to be considering in this video Ruth chapter 4, verses 7 through 12. We'll read that in just a few moments, but I want to begin by doing something maybe a little lighthearted, humorous, and that is to talk about customs in the world that are very odd. We do things in our culture that other cultures might look at as odd, and other cultures in the world do things, and we go, "What were they thinking?" Well, for example, we have children put a lost tooth under the pillow in exchange for a few coins or a couple dollar bills or something. Well, in Greece, children are encouraged to actually throw their tooth onto the roof, and they're supposed to do that along with a wish for strong adult teeth. We in America have lots of happy bridal showers before the big day, but in some regions of China, brides-to-be traditionally weep for at least 1 hour each day for an entire month before the wedding. And by the way, the bride's mother also joins in the weeping, which I'm sure the future husband-in-law, husband-to-be, makes him feel great about his relationship with his future mother-in-law. But while those are odd traditions, even if we were to go back into history, we would find some that may seem even stranger. Some were huge, some were over the top, others were simply parts of day-to-day life and just seem very odd to us. And in Ruth chapter 4, the section we're going to be studying in this video, verses 7 through 12, we have one of those odd to us traditions or customs that was common in that time of Israel. But if we only see the oddity of the custom, we can miss the beauty of what happened because of that custom. Because it's in this section of the book of Ruth that we finally and we truly get the concept of redemption being fully realized. So with that in mind, let's read Ruth 4, verses 7 through 12, and we'll take a few moments to notice some things from these verses. Now this was the custom in former times in Israel concerning redeeming and exchanging. To confirm a transaction, the one drew off his sandal and gave it to the other, and this was the manner of attesting in Israel. So, when the Redeemer said to Boaz, "Buy it for yourself," he drew off his sandal. And then Boaz said to the elders and all the people, "If you are witnesses this day that I have bought from the hand of Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech, and all that belonged to Chilion and to Mahlon, also Ruth the Moabite, the widow of Mahlon, I have bought to be my wife, to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance, that the name of the dead may not be cut off from among his brothers, and from the gate of his native place. You are witnesses this day." Then all the people who were at the gate and the elders said, "We are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your house like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. May you act worthily in Ephrathah and be renowned in Bethlehem. And may your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah, because of the offspring that the Lord will give you by this young woman." So now, a quick note. Ruth chapter 4 and verse 7, where it talks about this custom. This is one of those passages that's used by some to say that this book, the book of Ruth, was written much later in Old Testament times, possibly just before or even during the exile. It happened centuries later. Since the tradition has to be explained, it's claimed that this is proof of a much, much, much later writing. Well, that's possible. And if you go way back to the beginning of this series of videos on Ruth, we talked about the date of the book. But consider just a couple of other possibilities. For one, traditions and customs change very rapidly. If Ruth was written just a handful of generations later, this custom, the sandal thing, could have already been well in the past, much like we even in our culture see traditions from 50 to 100 years ago, many of them as just kind of relics. And it's also possible, though not as probable, that Ruth was written earlier, but a later inspired writer was used by the Holy Spirit to add this one quick note of explanation. While again, that's not likely, we can't fully rule out that possibility. So I wanted to say that as a way to tie these videos together, with the timing of the book. So with that, let's dive into the text itself. This nearer Redeemer formally accepts Boaz's words, and he simply states, "Buy it for yourself," verse 8. That those words may be brief and they may sound somewhat cold. They were likely said to begin sort of the formal process of making things legitimate and right, almost judicial in a sense. And so we don't need to read too much into the fact they sound just formal and cold. But when the words have been said, the Bible then tells us this man drew off his sandal in order to show that this was legal, this was legitimate. And while the Bible never makes this connection with this very sort of odd tradition, some scholars have argued that this custom actually had roots in ancient promise. Because centuries earlier, God had told Joshua, just before the conquest of the Promised Land, he said, "Every place that the sole of your foot will tread upon, I have given you, just as I promised to Moses." That's found in Joshua chapter 1 and verse 3. So there are some scholars that I'm using various videos, Ferguson and others, who speculate, that's all it is, it's just speculation, that this custom of handing over sandals may sort of be an echo back to that promise. It's interesting to think about for sure. So Boaz and this near Redeemer, whose name we never learn, had met at the city gate. Boaz had made sure that would happen in order to hasten this interaction. The gates of these ancient cities were where many of the judicial and other legal matters were discussed and settled. And Boaz wants this matter known, legally, but also socially. And so he's not ashamed to call out both the elders and all the people. The elders, of course, would be those who led the city, who made legal decisions. Their stamp of approval on this matter would have made it more of a legal, a binding matter. But Boaz was not afraid of anyone, to ask anyone else who might happen to be around to see this exchange. Sort of think of them as sort of the gallery in the courtroom. And so to say they are witnesses also. That would make what was happening more accepted within the larger community, not just with some matter of cold legality. That little detail, by the way, helps us to consider something much larger just by way of application. And that is this: our faithfulness to God's plan cannot just be a matter of a private matter. It should be known by all who are around us, and we should do our best to make sure that others realize that we're trying to live for Him in every aspect of our lives. And certainly, we're not suggesting that a Christian should be an annoyance to people around him, but there should also just be no hiding. That we do things to God's glory, that we're seeking to follow His word, we're always seeking His wisdom. Any chance we can get to say a word for Him, to show that we're trying to follow Him, we should take that chance. And we should tell others, in effect, that they are witnesses, that we're doing something in accordance with the will of God. So you may want to take that as just a thought of application from those couple of verses. So the little speech that Boaz gives to the elders and people is, in a lot of ways, a legal speech. But what he expresses in the words is nothing short of beautiful. For one thing, for the first time since the opening verses of the book, we have the names of all three of Naomi's deceased relatives given. Again, part of that is simply legal, but Boaz is making it clear that he's buying back all that belonged to Elimelech, that's Naomi's deceased husband, as well as all the things that belonged to both of Naomi's deceased sons, Chilion and Mahlon. But notice carefully that Boaz states that he's bought these things from the hand of Naomi. That's found in verse 9. While that is legally the case, it's also honoring to her in a way. Because for all these years, Naomi has been doing her best to simply scrape by, with Ruth's help, of course. And Boaz is honoring her name as well as her leadership of all that's been under her care since the loss of her husband and her two sons. Boaz is redeeming all of these possessions. They would have left his grasp, as it were, if the nearer kinsman had decided to make the purchase. But now that that man has not, Boaz buys them back. He brings them back under his headship through an exchange of some type. It's of some interest, by the way, that we're never told in the text what the price was that Boaz paid for any of this. Whatever the price was, however, it would have been a sacrifice, because not only was Boaz paying for land and possessions, but he was also going to take Ruth as his wife, and as strange as that may sound, that took a financial transaction also. In verse 10, Boaz makes it clear that he's not going to take Ruth as his wife. He makes it clear that he is, going to take Ruth as his wife in all this. Such a statement would have been romantic in a way, but it's also tremendously important how it's made and where it is made. The how is again a statement of honor. Boaz again honors Mahlon, Ruth's deceased husband by name. And by the way, this is the only time in the book where we can connect the dots between which daughter-in-law of Naomi was married to which son. The two sons were mentioned in chapter 1 and verse 2, but the two wives in chapter 1 and verse 4, but which wife belonged to which husband is not made clear until now at the end of the book. But Boaz also makes it clear that his stated reason for doing this is, verse 10, to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance, that the name of the dead may not be cut off from among the brothers and from the gate of his native place. Now, some may read that and think that Boaz is just kind of blowing smoke. After all, he's obviously in love with Ruth. Now, that's no doubt true. But Boaz, a man of integrity, will not let that blossoming love overshadow his judgment and his willingness to honor both Mahlon and Ruth in this way. By the way, the brothers mentioned in verse 10, it's basically a term for the entire family. Boaz is basically making it clear that by taking Ruth as wife, he is ensuring that the entire family circle of Ruth's deceased husband is still part of the fabric of the community, and as such should be honored. While he loves Ruth, again, this is a statement of nobility and honor. This is a good man saying these things. But the where of the statement occurring in such a public place is also extremely important, considering Ruth is not an Israelite. Boaz clearly calls her Ruth the Moabite, and obviously the people of the city knew her by now. But it still could have come across as somewhat of a surprise that he would marry a foreigner. Boaz wanted it clearly known that he knew who she was and that he was going to marry her anyway. Now, would this have violated God's law? No, because she had clearly become a follower of Jehovah. Throughout the narrative, she had lived up to her promise to Naomi that the God of Naomi would be her God also, chapter 1, verse 16. She had honored Naomi. She had blessed the people of God of the community. She was known as a diligent worker. In fact, in every way, she was known as a virtuous woman, chapter 3, verse 11. And it would have been enough in this text for the people, the witnesses, to simply state, we are witnesses. And they do that from the outset in chapter 4, verse 11. But don't you find it beautiful if they go much further? They offer a wonderful statement of blessing to Boaz and to Ruth. They begin by blessing Boaz through Ruth, asking God to cause her to be, verse 11, like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. Now, that may seem odd to compare her to two women, but the point is the final clause. They see something very special and very hopeful in this couple, and they want them not only produce children, but for those children to be, in a way, a foundation for the community and for the people. But it's the second historical reference in this blessing that may throw us off. The people ask God to make this new home like the house of Perez or Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah, verse 12. It's very rare that we hear the word Tamar and think of much positive. So why would the people say this, since Perez, frankly, was born to her through incest? I think Ferguson gets it right. He writes this: the reference is particularly poignant because the Levirate law featured largely in that terrible incident, but without it there would have been no Boaz, as our narrator will make clear a few verses later on. Embedded in Boaz's personal history is an amazing example of how God can weave disaster and sin together into his purposes and produce a Boaz, end quote. Now, one other reason this would be important is because Perez's descendants, which obviously included Boaz, settled in and around Bethlehem. While there's no denying the awful circumstances surrounding how Perez was conceived, God had used that to continue this group of people. And as such, there's no denying the terrible circumstances that had initially brought Ruth to Bethlehem. But God was weaving something great in and through her, just as he was in and through Boaz, and the people blessed them by saying they want that to continue. So the picture of how this redemption took place, it may seem really odd to us, but it leads to something beautiful. Handing over a sandal in the city gate is not exactly how we make business transactions in these days. But if we can get past the oddity of that cultural element and see the honor and the love that was behind all this, we're going to do very, very well. But it also points us to something of eternal value. Our redemption was also purchased in a fashion that seems very odd to the world. To have the Son of God die on a shameful Roman cross. That just doesn't make any sense. To the world, it's nothing but foolishness, as you read in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 21 to 25. But to those of us who believe in it, we see true redemption and true love. Oh, and the one who did that was not only born in the town of Bethlehem, but he was from the same family line. And we'll see that as we continue on in the final chapter of the book of Ruth. Thank you for watching this video, this re-recorded video. We hope this encourages you. We have 2 more lessons on the book of Ruth, and we hope that you'll subscribe, share, and let us know more about what you're learning about the book of Ruth in these videos, and let others know about what we're trying to do through our channel. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again very soon.